Hey, everybody, welcome back to Mind of the Warrior. As always, I am your host, Dr. Mike Simpson. And as always, this podcast is brought to you by Graybeard Performance, the life and lifestyle brand for dudes over 40 who want to continue to be savages and kick ass. If you go to graybeardperformance.com now, check out our line of supplements, check out our fight gear, use the promo code MOTW to get 10% off at checkout as a loyal Mind of the Warrior listener. And speaking of dudes over 40, continuing to kick ass, very special guest on the podcast. You know him, you love him, you absolutely cannot live without him. He's been on the podcast multiple times. My old buddy from residency, the guy who got me into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the guy who got me into age management, hormone replacement, Dr. Andrew Winge, MD. Brother, so great to have you back on the podcast.
Dude, thanks for having me back. Yeah.
Man, we've every time you come on, I learn something new, something that I add to my own repertoire and what I'm doing, something that I add to my medical practice in hormone replacement and age management. I wanted to start off today talking a little bit about something that I talk about in my book at great length, and that is for me the biggest change in physicality, in fitness, in athleticism. If I had to point to one area and say, here's the biggest difference, it's not necessarily strength. It is speed to some extent, not necessarily endurance, but definitely recovery is where I noticed the biggest changes, where I've had to make the biggest modifications is in how I approach recovery. And something that I didn't even think about in my younger days, my late teens and early 20s. Recovery was, if I was sitting down having a meal, like not exerting myself for 15 minutes, that was recovery. And that's not the case anymore.
That's all you needed.
That literally was all I needed. And I use the analogy quite a bit that, in your younger days, you're living on a credit card with compound interest. And it's not until you get old enough that you want to pay off all your debt that you start really paying attention to that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about telomeres. Let's talk about blood flow. Let's talk about cellular regeneration.
Yeah.
Why is it that I can, if I do a 2 a day now, if I, when I go in the morning, I do an hour of strength and conditioning, and I go 2 hours and do 2 hours of jiu-jitsu at night on a Tuesday night. Why is it that I'm just wiped on Wednesday? What's different about our bodies? What's different about me as a 57-year-old that wasn't like that as a 27-year-old?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, people have written entire textbooks on that. All the different stuff that happens to you, the biology of aging, and we're still like scratching the surface on all of that stuff. But we can start with the cardiovascular system. The ability of your heart to squeeze as strongly as it did when you're 20 is just not there. Your maximum heart rate drops. That's a huge one. That's one of the prime determinants of your cardiac output. It's heart rate times stroke volume. So, they say 220 minus your age is your maximum heart rate. Well, as that age goes up, that max heart rate, you just cannot get your heart rate. It just won't go, past a certain amount.
Unless you're in AFib with RVR, which you don't want to be.
Right. Well, that's one way to do it. That's one way to do it. I don't recommend it, but we see enough of that in the ER. But just your ability for your heart to generate that amount of cardiac output, it just starts to slowly go down. And there's many reasons for that. There's neurological reasons, changes in the CNS. There's changes in the electrical conduction of the heart. You can have fibrosis within the electrical system of the heart. Signals don't transmit as quickly. As you get older, your ventricles can get stiff, so they don't relax as much. When that's severe, that can be that's a type of heart failure. But even in normal older people, their ventricles just don't relax, and your ventricle has to completely relax in order to fully fill with blood. Mm-hmm. So if it's not completely relaxing, well, it's not getting as much, it's not filling with as much blood as it did, back when you were 20. So like they call your end diastolic volume goes down. And of course, you can only pump forward what has come in. So if less is coming in, you're not squeezing it out as strongly. Your cardiac output's going to drop, and then again, the rate of contraction is going to go down. A lot of that also has to do with the energy systems of the heart. You mentioned, I think you mentioned like mitochondria, mitochondrial aging, mitochondrial degeneration. Those are all things that happen naturally with aging. And it's an area that, there's actually a ton of research in, like, how do we either preserve our mitochondria? How do we regenerate our mitochondria? And, nobody really knows. I mean, there's a lot of different thoughts about how to do that, different supplements and whatnot. But that is part of the aging process. I mean, it's, even if there was a way to slow it down, it will progress, to a certain extent. Your joints get stiff as you get older. You start to calcify, like we petrify like a piece of wood, as we get older. Calcium gets deposited in our arteries. So the arteries are supposed to relax, they're supposed to contract and expand, with every cardiac cycle. And, when you're young, that happens really easily. You have nice, smooth muscle in there that responds like it's supposed to. You have a lot of nitric oxide floating around, so you don't produce the nitric oxide anymore. And then on top of that, you have, calcium that's deposited in the intima of the vessels, which makes those arteries stiff. Then, on top of that, then you get atherosclerosis. We didn't talk about that. So you start having plaque building up, not just in your coronary vessels, but in your peripheral vessels too. The big arteries that go to your glutes and your quads and your hamstrings, you can have rate limiting stenosis and that stuff too. That, you wouldn't necessarily know it until you're at like very high levels of exertion. We see it in the emergency room and in the hospital. When it's severe, old guys get claudication. But you can have sort of subclinical atherosclerosis or peripheral vascular disease that only manifests itself when you try to really push yourself. So it's a spectrum. So I mean, the list goes on, right? Like it's just there's endless things that change in your body. The key is to like slow that down as much as possible. And regardless of what's out there and what's being sold in terms of supplements and even, maybe some prescription drugs, we can talk about some of those. There's some interesting things in the world of prescription drugs that can, help exercise performance in older people. But man, it's diet and lifestyle. The normal, I mean, you know better than I do, the normal course for the average American is you start losing muscle mass in your mid 30s. You start going down, people say it's a 1% a year, 1.5% a year. And you gain body fat. So muscle mass is going down, body fat's going up. And that's just a recipe for not only tons of health problems, but clearly like your ability to perform is going to be totally shit, compared to what you were younger.
That roughly corresponds to about the same time that you're getting that second. You have two big dips in your growth hormone output. In you have the peri / post-pubescent dip, and then you have your mid 30s dip, which depending on what literature you read, a lot of the literature I've read says that the drop off that you see in your mid 30s, you would expect I'm done growing, I'm out of puberty dip to be the big one. But a lot of the literature says, no, the big drop is actually the one that you get in your 30s.
Yeah, that may be the case. Yeah. But what else happens to most guys in their 30s, right? They get married. They
slow down.
Kids.
Yeah,
they got
slow
responsibilities. Down. So, they're not going to the gym. They're not training, or, if they're still active duty, they're spending more time behind a desk. They're not.
That's the point that you're kind of getting promoted out of that operator.
You get promoted. And you stop doing all the fun stuff. And, and maybe you start missing PT here and there because you got a meeting to go to, a lot of stuff happens that contributes to that. But regardless, I mean, there's stuff there's biology. You can't, you can't get out of that. So you got to adjust your training, and that's something you and I have done a lot. Maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the training you used to do, and I can touch on what I used to do now. I know that if I tried to do the volume that I did in my 20s, I would break. I mean, I would be, I would tear something. I would be like grossly overtrained. Yeah, I just can't do it.
I had two. There's two times in my career that I can point to as kind of my peak fitness as an operator. The first being one was in my late 20s, and one was just a few years later in my early 30s. Mm-hmm. Both of which corresponded with one was when I was an instructor at the Jungle School in Panama. So didn't have a lot of distractions, wasn't, I was on Fort Sherman. You had to drive really far to, the nearest town was Cologne. So a long way to drive, not a whole lot to do in Cologne other than just drink. So, we didn't have, a gazillion television channels. We didn't have a movie theater. So not a lot of distraction during that time. A typical day for me was get up before the crack of dawn. Whether the team was doing PT or not, I was doing PT. I was running at the time. I was running a minimum of 4 to 5 miles because I was really big on wanting to lean out and get my endurance up. I'm 5'6", built like a whiskey keg, so I'm not built as a runner. During times of high performance, I would force myself basically to become a long distance runner, which is one of the reasons that I got a hip replacement at 56 years old, which we can talk more about later. But I get up, I'd run, somewhere between usually 4 and 8 miles. I'd come back, I do a round robin of exercises that, typically one day I would be concentrating more on pushing type stuff, more upper body, pecs, arms, and shoulders. And then other days it was more core and legs. Once a week I would do a shorter run, and I would swim the bay just to kind of break things up a little bit. I would work all day as an instructor at the Jungle School. Sometimes that was out on the lanes. Sometimes, that was very rarely that was in a classroom or a bleacher scenario. And then in the evening, I would do my heavy duty strength training. So I was lifting very heavy. I weighed 143 pounds. I weighed 143. I think I was benching 235. I wasn't doing a lot of heavy like squats or deadlifts or stuff like that. But I remember I got to the point that I was doing incline bench with a 70-pound dumbbell in each hand. And I had to have people push me into position because I didn't have enough ass actually to get back in position. Because I had 140 pounds in my hands, and I only weighed 143. Right. So I couldn't get in position. I had to have people put me into position so I would be able to do the appropriate weight. And that was 5 to 6 days a week. Yeah. That's what I was doing. And then I would rest like a day. And that was pretty much it.
And you could still go out on the weekends.
Yeah, I slept like a baby every night.
Yeah. Drink beers on the weekend and have a good time.
Yeah, go out. In fact, I would sometime on Saturdays, I would get up early, go for a run, come back, grab my spearfishing gear, and go spearfishing. And this was free diving. This was not with tanks. I wasn't scuba diving. Yeah. And I'd spend the whole day, swimming around underwater. Never felt like I was deprived. For the most part, I was just eating, a pretty much a clean diet. There was nothing really special about it. I didn't know a lot about nutrition then, so I probably wasn't getting enough fat in retrospect. Yeah. And then, again, in my early 30s, it was kind of similar. I was working I was running a clinic in Chimere, Bolivia. There, I was so bored. I would run in the morning. We had an airfield to run on. I'd run a minimum of 5 miles in the morning. At lunch, I would borrow one of the DE agents' bicycle, and I would just set a timer for 45 minutes, and I would just bike back and forth on the airfield for 45 minutes. Yeah. And then I would lift weights in the evening. So I was doing 3 a days.
Yeah. Yeah. And you felt great, I'm sure.
Felt awesome. I felt awesome. And you and I have talked about this before.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I got down under 11% body fat
Right.
that it started to really hit me.
Yeah.
That I started to really feel that.
Yeah. For sure.
Now, there's really only 2 days a week that I do 2-a-days. I do strength and conditioning. My coach programs 4 workouts a week. I go to jiu-jitsu 2 nights a week. I try to get in an extra jiu-jitsu if I have time on Wednesday during the day. 2 of my Wednesdays are dedicated to SWAT, so I can't do it on those days. Typically on a weekend, Denise and I will go together, and I'll set up usually an interval, a hit round robin in the gym at GPD, where we'll do typically 5 stations, 2 minutes on. We'll vary it either a 30-second rest or a 1-minute rest, and then we'll go through that twice.
Perfect.
So you end up doing 20 minutes of solid work, punctuated, with some rests in between. And this is constant movement. This is tire flips, sledgehammers, sled pushes. I do a lot of stuff in a weighted vest, suitcase carries, kettlebell cleans, Jacob's ladder. So it's a lot of moving. Or I'll go in the garage and I'll do a similar interval set, punching the heavy bag, doing combos on the heavy bag with Boss Rutan yelling at me to do it. But a 2-a-day really kicks my ass now. I've noticed.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what kicks my ass more than anything. It's just kind of being on all day. I had
that's fatiguing.
I had a 7-hour stakeout last week.
Yeah.
Completely wiped me out.
Yeah.
If I'm wearing kit, if I'm on the range in kit all day, wipes me out. Just absolutely.
Yeah.
So I notice a difference. I know, I'm doing it, while I'm focused and I'm in the moment, not so much, but definitely in the recovery.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're like me, it's when we can still perform at a high level. I can still push weights that are very respectable at the gym. I can still roll, really hard, multiple rounds, but and hang with the 20-year-old college wrestlers. The difference is, they come back for the night class and do it all again.
Yeah, or the 6:30 class the next day.
I'm at home like with a heating pad or like a cold shower, and some ibuprofen. And so it's, again, it's like I track all of them. I have workout logs going back to college, and granted, I'm not pushing the weights that I was. I mean, I was a competitive power lifter, so every single week, in addition to playing collegiate rugby, I mean, I was squatting and deadlifting over 600 pounds for reps. So I can't do that anymore, obviously, because of my back. I have orthopedic stuff, but I can still do the high rep stuff. I did a leg workout the other day, and I worked out with these young college kids, and I had 10 plates on the leg press, and I did 20 solid reps all the way up, all the way down for 20 reps. But other than some minor finishing movements, that was my leg workout. And they were all really impressed. Like, the old man can still do it, but they kept going. They did like 5 or 6 more sets, and I was like, I'm done here.
Yeah, right.
Because that's about all I can handle now. With I just don't. I can perform at a high level, but then there is a long recovery period. So I could get away with heavy weights 5 or 6 days a week in my 20s. And, I lift weights like 2.5 days a week now, for maybe 30 minutes. I say 2.5 because it's like there's jiu-jitsu days in there as well. But even my jiu-jitsu days, I'm injured right now, so I'm just teaching 2 days a week and doing some light rolling like on Fridays. But, I will roll 3 days a week, but really only one of those days is like a really hard day. Like a hard day that I would consider hard even back in the day. The other 2 days, there's a bit more technique, or I get the other guys that are my age, and we do some old man jiu-jitsu, and especially with jiu-jitsu, like as you know, like you can't, the injury potential is pretty high, right?
Yeah.
As you get older. You're older than I am. I'm a week away from turning 50. So, and I've got a whole crop of like young 20 something blue belts that would just love to tap me out. They want to get doc, and
Sure.
they're gunning for me. And quite frankly, like so I'm a little careful about who I roll with. I mean, that's how I blew my ACL.
Yeah.
I had this jacked, kind of crazy, spazzy blue belt, just like sprawled on my leg,
Yeah.
popped my ACL. So,
Yeah.
when you're older, you have to be a little like I never thought about injuries, when I power lifted. I get under 600 pounds on the bar, it's bending, and I just did it.
Yeah.
Now when I get underweight, I'm like, I make sure all my feet are perfectly placed.
Yeah.
Okay, nothing hurts. All right, everything's balanced. I've already done my stretches, my warm-ups. I do the first rep kind of gingerly. All right, nothing's cracking or popping. All right, let's go. Everything is a little bit, I can still do it, but man, I have to be careful.
I do a little bit. I do what I call my ground up analysis. I look down at my toes. I make sure my toes are tracking in the direction of my knees. Everything is the width that I want it to be. My hand placement is correct. When I do bench, I'm very, before I'll even grab the bar, I drop my elbows down. If I feel uneven pressure on one shoulder blade and I don't feel like I'm perfectly centered on the bench, I'll move over. These are all things you have to think about. And it's usually, I work out a lot alone, so I don't have a spotter.
I do too.
And I prefer it that way for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
I don't need to ego lift. I don't need the one that, hey, I'm going to try to do 3, you make sure you're there on number 3, I don't need to do those. If I'm supposed to do 10 and I do 10, 10, 8 in my 3 sets, I'm okay with that. That's, I don't want to drop it on my windpipe. I don't want to knock all my teeth out. So I'm okay with that. You talked about jiu-jitsu, and I tell you, I wish I had the exposure to John Danaher and New Wave. Back when I first started, even though I started late.
Yeah, me too.
I gotta tell you, those guys are pro. First of all, they're rolling no-gi, and to be perfectly honest, I think the injury potential, the catastrophic, if you're doing no-gi from stand-up, especially in competition, the potential for catastrophic injury is very high.
Well, we've both seen it. I mean, that's guys blow their knees.
Yeah. Severe neck injuries also,
all that stuff,
stuff like that. And when it gets very ballistic, when you're rolling with somebody who's very ballistic and fast, because no-gi is such a faster game, there is the potential, to have a severe hyperextension, to have a knee blown out, to get injured on a leg lock. But it's, all the little minor, friction injuries that happen in gi. And another thing about those guys is they don't go into class and murder roll every time they roll.
Well, you can't,
No, that's how they train 3 times a day, 6 to 7 days a week, is because they're not murder rolls.
Right.
You go in there, you slap hands, bump knuckles, but you're going usually, if it's a Danaher class, you're going from position every time. You're starting in half guard. You're starting in side control. You're starting at the back. You're starting in turtle guard.
I like
you're
that
not. Too. Yeah. So that potential for ballistic craziness that initially happens in that initial scramble. Yeah. It's eliminated. Right. So it kind of changes your tone. He doesn't run a clock. He runs the clock in his head. Yeah. He totally runs the clock in his head. And he's running an actual clock too. Cause one time I was talking to him and he held a conversation with me and he was like, hold on a second. Time, gentlemen, switch partners. That's how much he is, right?
Why doesn't that surprise me?
Yeah, right.
Why does that surprise me?
There's no, you don't play music while you're rolling, right? You can hear a pin drop. You hear people sweating and grunting, but in between you can basically hear a pin drop. Yeah. And he told me, and I've shared this story with you. I've shared it multiple times. He says, you have to know when to say no, you know, when to
Oh,
say,
yeah.
this is a training partner that I'm not going to roll with.
Yeah.
This is a move that I'm not going to do. This is a day that I'm going to not train because my body tells me that I'm not going
And that's
to.
hard. Like that's an ego thing.
That's a huge ego
I'll be
thing.
honest with you, I've struggled with that, and I have been hurt because of that. I've trained on hard and too hard on days, you know, with my torn rotator cuff that I knew it was hurting, and you know, and then you know this guy's like calling me out, you know, and I still in my head am 22 years old, you know, and but that's hard. But you know, you hopefully you live and you learn, and unfortunately, you know, I learned the hard way, you know, with injuries and stuff. But yeah, you've got to be, you know, Eric Paulson said something about that too. I saw an interview with him. You know, he's getting older now, and he's like, if he said, you know, he's a little woo, so he can tell if, you know, he's like, if you have bad energy, he's like, I won't roll with you. So he can just tell, you know. But it comes down to the fact that like he just, you know, he doesn't want to roll with somebody who is there to try to tap out Eric Paulson, you know, who's now, I don't know, he's in his 50s, you know, at least, you know, I think, you know, it's probably in his could be in his late 50s. I don't know. So yeah, you have to be smart, man. It's and that's just, it comes with the territory. Like if we want to keep doing this kind of stuff and you want to stay in shape and you want to still be able to perform in a given sport like jiu-jitsu or, you know, whatever your sport is, you know, you have to listen, you have to listen to your body, you know, and it sounds like, you know, so trite, you know, to say that, but like, it's really true. Yeah, you really have to listen to your body, and when it's and like give yourself permission to take a day off, or you know, I don't know, you know, in terms of, we could talk about recovery techniques, but you know, you could have
that's actually perfect segue because that's what I wanted to jump into next.
You know, you mentioned you do like 10 8 8. You know, I've changed now, like I do sets of 15, you know, or even 18, like for my shoulders because they're so wrecked. I don't do less than, I shoot for 18 to 20 reps to failure. So it's for me, it's relatively lightweight and higher repetition, but you know, the data on, you know, for muscle hypertrophy says, you know, if you can get equivalent amounts of hypertrophy with lighter or higher reps, you just have to go to failure.
Right.
Which isn't a problem for me because I've always trained to failure.
Right.
So, you know, you may need to change your workouts, but you know, maybe you don't need to do sets of 6 and load, you know, because you're loading connective tissue. You know, I'm at the stage now, and you are too. I want to load the muscle. I want to work the muscle. I want to stimulate growth, and then I want to get the hell out of there. I don't want to stimulate. I don't want to stress my connective tissue, which has already been stressed.
Right.
You know, and the, you know, of course, the blood supply to connective tissue is, you know, is not as good as muscle tissue, and you know, these little micro tears and traumas in tendons and ligaments, like it adds up. So, so yeah, so maybe we can talk about, you know, I don't know how you like to do your heavy light days, but for me, I'll either take a full day off and rest completely, or I'll just much lighter weight.
Yeah.
Much, you know, even like higher reps, 20, 30 reps, even just to get good blood flow, and you still get, you know, you have the little plates on the bar instead of the big plates.
Sure.
You know, you have to, you know, and realize that nobody cares. And it's just let go of your ego.
Yeah. So for me, that's what my hit days are, because I'm not doing, you know, I'm swinging a kettlebell. The only time I'm really carrying heavy weights is, you know, I've got a weight vest on, and I've got, you know, I don't know, maybe a 24 kilo kettlebell in each hand doing a farmer's carry. But I'm also walking, you know, I'm not, you know, pressing it or something like that. I'm walking under load, which I think is a highly undervalued form of exercise.
Oh, I mean, it's
load. Yeah. The cardiovascular effect of it, the fat burning effect of it, the core, the stabilization muscles.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I've really come to appreciate, there's a lot of exercises that I've really come to appreciate, you know, in the last decade of my fitness journey, you know, stuff that I didn't know before. Let me ask you this. So other than, I mean, all the things that we talk about all the time, proper nutrition, avoiding alcohol, avoiding nicotine, avoiding too much caffeine, plenty of water, plenty of sleep, all trace vitamins and minerals. What do you think? What do you include in a recipe for successful recovery? And I would include, hormone, peptide, and pharmacologic intervention.
Okay. So we'll hit all of it.
What do you see when you look?
The first thing is like you got to go into every workout like properly hydrated, for sure. And then maintain that during the workout and then afterwards. It goes without saying that like sleep is absolutely crucial. You have to set a good sleep schedule. Getting a good, depending on what your genetics are, people are a little bit different, but at least, that solid 8 hours of like uninterrupted REM cycles is really, really important, which, I've always struggled with that. I mean, we're shift workers. I finished work last night at midnight, and I was at a hotel, and I drove back home at 4 a.m. today, and I've been up ever since. So, and it's in the evening time here. So, and I've already worked out today. So, today's workout was, the recovery from today's workout is going to be compromised because I've been out of town working shifts and not sleeping for 3 days. So hydration and sleep are just like the cornerstones, the bedrocks of that. Clearly like adequate protein is, regardless of whether you're working out, as you get older, you have to maintain adequate protein levels. But, the old, what the bros have said over the years about, a gram per pound of body weight, turns out is based on the research is probably pretty accurate, 2.2 grams per kilo. There's not too much benefit above that for most people, except, perhaps like when you're elderly. So over the age of 65, they actually might need a little bit more, or if you're in a calorie deficit.
Yeah. And what's odd about that, sorry to interrupt, but what's funny about that is I've read multiple articles talking about why people should decrease their protein. And I'm talking about some of these are advocating ridiculously low numbers. As you get older, blah, 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 decrease your protein. But when you get down into the fine print, they'll say, because you're not working out anymore. And it's like, but why aren't you working out anymore?
Therein lies the problem.
It's you're solving the wrong thing. That's like saying, well, if you're going to drink and drive anyway, let's put you in a big car so you don't get killed. No, you're addressing the wrong problem.
Exactly. But even the I think it's a like U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, some government agency that you should not listen to for anything. Like their recommendation, I think, is like 0.8 grams per kilo for like the average person, including the elderly, which is like woefully inadequate. So 2.2 grams per kilo, or like the pound per or gram per pound of lean body weight. That's for like high, for athletes, for people who, and I count people, if you lift weights, 3 days a week, you're an athlete, and that's probably how much protein you should be eating. But like, just, the general recommendations that your family practice doctor gives you, when they look it up in their little book, 0.8, you're good, grandma. It's not good enough for grandma. Grandma needs a lot more. There's this thing, I know you're aware of it, but the listeners might not be. As you get older, you get something called anabolic resistance. And there's this phenomenon with, like, leucine is the most important branched chain amino acid, they say, for stimulating muscle protein synthesis. There's other ones too, but the branched chain amino acids, leucine's like the king. So you'll get, like, if you give a 20-year-old 5 grams of leucine, you'll get X amount of muscle protein synthesis. Like after that, it stimulates mTOR, it does all these things. Well, if you give, in order to get the same amount of protein synthesis out of grandpa, he needs a lot more than 5 grams. So might need 10 grams, to get the same amount of muscle protein synthesis. So keep that in mind. Like, you guys out there that are older lifters, you need to be going up on your protein, not down. And unfortunately, like, I've seen those recommendations that you've talked about, and I've heard some, usually like plant-based, doctors out there who, have said stuff like that. And, quite frankly, a lot of those guys, without getting too ad hominem, have a good case of the early sarcopenia kicking in themselves. You know,
Right.
they're going to be in my department with a osteoporotic fracture in 10 or 15 years. You know,
Yeah.
So protein's super important. And you know, I mean, just good nutrition in general is important. You got to get all your micronutrients. You can't afford to have any micronutrient deficiencies. So obviously, you should, you know, try to get what you can from your diet. But you know, in my opinion, everybody can benefit from some micronutrient supplementation. Even just like a multivitamin as an insurance policy, vitamin D, magnesium, all that stuff is super important. You know, clearly, like, you know, you and I talk about TRT a lot. And there's no doubt. I think that, I mean, that's just something that testosterone does, right? It improves muscle protein synthesis, improves muscle recovery after exercise. That's what it does. It's you know, people think of it as an anabolic agent, and it is, but it's also very anti-catabolic. So it addresses the muscle protein breakdown, you know, that occurs because there's always a balance, you know, in your body between building muscle and breaking it down, breaking it down. And most of the time, day to day, you know, breakdown equals building, and you're kind of are neutral. But as you get older, man, that the breakdown exceeds the buildup, and that's where that downward trajectory starts in your 30s.
Right.
And it's so subtle, most people don't even notice it. So
you know,
you
and
really
that's
have to get on that.
That's the linchpin of really understanding recovery, is that if all you're doing, if you're going to the gym and going hard and lifting heavy for an hour, but then you're not doing all the other stuff, you did the breakdown part, but you didn't do the rebuilding part.
Exactly.
And that's why, you know, the diet on point, the hydration on point, enough rest, enough sleep, you know, not doing anything that's going to hamper your normal physiologic effects. And then, you know, it's, you know, I'm on testosterone, you're on testosterone. I'm not ashamed of it. In fact, one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Absolutely.
You know, and we both have practices that we have, you know, patients that we're optimizing their testosterone levels. And it does make a huge difference. You know, that was, not only were my workouts different when I got to the point that, you know, that I identified the problem, my exercise tolerance was bad. It was in the toilet. And then I also noticed that, like, it was almost impossible for me to work out 2 days in a row. It's like, I still feel like
I remember in residency. I mean,
you
know, in your pre-TRT days, I mean, you know, we were all sleep deprived. We all had, our circadian rhythms were just wrecked. You know, all of us were eating pretty shitty food because you're working so hard and so many hours. And, you know, I just got to the gym and it was just like I was a zombie going through my workouts when I could go, which was 2 days a week, because, you know, we were at times, you know, exceeding that so-called 80-hour limit, you know, pretty regularly. So yeah, it's rough, man. It's rough. But then, you know, obviously we get out of residency, like it took me like 3 months to feel like a normal human being again and catch up on my sleep after we graduated. But you know, you start feeling better, and then, you know, shortly after that, I started on TRT. It's ironic though, because, you know, I didn't feel like TRT was helping my recovery initially, because, you know, I had so much more energy now and so much more drive to like push hard in the gym. I couldn't generate the mental effort to push myself to failure when I had low testosterone. So ironically, when I got on testosterone, I could work out so much harder that I was way more sore, and I needed to like give myself extra rest days. But it's only because I pushed now that I had, you know, healthy level of testosterone in my body, I could push myself so hard that it's much harder than I had been doing, you know, for the preceding like 4 or 5 years. That now I actually was like more sore than I'd ever been after I started TRT. And then, you know, you catch up and it works out. But yeah, I was like, I thought I was supposed to bounce back quicker with this stuff, but it was only because I was training so much harder, you know, which is great.
Yeah. Let's talk about a little bit about peptides. What are you prescribing to your patients now? And you know, talk about a little bit about what peptides you're prescribing, in what forms, and what benefits they have.
So there's a lot of talk about these peptides, and I'll tell you, I'm naturally a skeptic about everything I remember one of my old attendings, he said, you never want to be, when something new is coming out, you never want to be the first person on it, and you don't obviously want to be the last person on it. So, having said that, I think peptides are, they're really promising. Like, they're really interesting. These are natural for the listeners. These are naturally occurring compounds, or just slightly modified naturally occurring compounds that your body produces naturally, and that are injected or ingested, usually injected, to achieve a specific effect. Whatever that might be, whether it's tendon healing or soft tissue healing. There's obviously there's growth hormone secreting peptides. Some of these are FDA approved and some are not. The problem with the peptide, there's a couple things with the peptide industry right now. One is it's in its infancy, so I'm a data guy. Like, I really want to see some good studies that show me, like, who's the best person to use this on, what's the right dose. There's a lot of stuff that's like educated guesswork by some pretty smart physicians out there. There's a whole ton of like junk bro science on the forums. So people are still kind of like figuring out. Anybody says that they have it all figured out with the peptides, I think, is not being honest, because again, the bulk of the research with a lot of these peptides is in animals. Mostly rat studies. There clearly are, like, there are a lot of human studies, but we just need a lot more, to really figure these things out. And then, of course, the other problem with the peptide industry is most guys are not getting their peptides from legitimate sources, right? They're getting them from research chemical sites, which probably a little suspect, right? You don't know what's in that vial. You don't know where it came from. God knows what's in that stuff. So I talk guys out of taking peptides. Now, having said that, do I prescribe them? Actually, pretty rarely. There's a few that I think have utility. I mainly prescribe them to achieve a specific outcome in a very specific setting, and usually that is injury recovery. So I'll use myself as an example. So, my knee is, I've got bone on bone osteoarthritis after my ACL injury and, losing my meniscus and whatnot. So, twice a year, I have a little peptide protocol that I use that really does, I have to admit, it helps dramatically. So I use this stuff called pentosan polysulfate, which ironically is used in the States for interstitial cystitis. So otherwise known as fibromyalgia of the bladder by some. Not to demean anyone that has that condition. Okay. I lost your audio, buddy. I don't know if you can hear me, but I lost your audio.
I was on mute. I didn't realize.
Oh, okay.
No, I had when we were in residency, I had a urologist say that.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. Okay. If urologist,
that's fibromyalgia of the bladder.
That's fibromyalgia of the bladder. Yeah. We're going to get some hate mail probably for that, but anyway,
nobody with fibromyalgia watches my show, so
yeah, probably. Yeah, that's actually a good point. So anyway, if you look at literature overseas, like in Australia, there's some literature on this stuff. It regenerates cartilage. We don't really use it in the States, but I stumbled across it a few years ago, and sure as hell, it really works. So I will take some of that with ipamorelin with CJC, which is a growth hormone secretagogue. Growth hormone, contrary to popular opinion, growth hormone is not like terribly anabolic to muscle. It should probably be renamed, but it is moderately anabolic and to connective tissue. So it actually, there's a ton of studies if you look in PubMed on giving guys growth hormone after ACL reconstruction or after various surgeries. They heal faster. And in the dermatology and cosmetic surgery world, the scars are heal faster. They look better when they put people on growth hormone. So there actually are a few docs out there that do that. There's not very many of them. I've never prescribed growth hormone for it, and it was so expensive that most people can't afford it. But that little peptide combo works really well for me. I do it twice a year. My knee's acting up now, so it's telling me that I need to start it again. So right now, I think that that's, and some people throw in like TB 500, which is like a thymosin peptide for, additional wound healing and, immune system support, which I always say, like, what the hell is immune system support? That sounds like naturopathic quackery, but, there's data that it can help with, various viral illnesses and, sepsis in animal models and things like that. So yeah, I don't think guys should just take peptides like willy nilly. BPC 157. I have a video on that on my channel.
And I get a lot of questions on that.
Yeah, I think it's legit. Yeah, I mean the animal data is like really impressive.
Yeah,
I use some
Wolverine peptide is what everybody calls it. Yeah,
it's not quite that impressive, but like I have to admit, like I had lateral epicondylitis. Whenever I never get armbarred on my left, it's always my right.
Me too.
Gotta do better.
Me too.
But I had chronic tendonitis, on my elbow, and I had it for 6 months. I couldn't get away with it or get rid of it with all the conventional stuff that doctors recommend. And I have to admit, with it was like 6 weeks of BPC 157, and it was gone. And it hasn't come back. So, that's my N of 1. But there's tons of animal data with like really impressive pictures of like severed Achilles tendons that have reattached, in rats and stuff. So there's definitely like a lot of potential in there. But if you're not injured and you don't have a specific goal in mind or a specific thing that you're trying to address, I don't know that just taking random peptides, without that sort of thing in mind is probably that good. And for God's sakes, like, don't get them off a research chemical site. Talk to a doctor. The problem is, of course, like, if you go to your internist or your family doc and you ask them for ipamorelin or penicillin or whatever, they're just going to be like, what? They don't even, understand testosterone, let alone peptides. Right. So you have to go to somebody who, at least understands that kind of stuff.
What do you think of these peptide nasal sprays that I'm seeing?
I don't know.
I made a similar noise when I saw them.
Yeah. I here's the thing with nasal, any kind of mucosal delivery. And I'm tainted by this because do you remember we had nasal midazolam and we had nasal ketamine that was available. Yeah. And I was like, oh, cool, this will be great. I'll give this to kids, that I need to suture. I don't have to put an IV in them. And, we give the med, and then, I come back, I come by 20 minutes later and the kid's like swinging off the ceiling. So I'm like,
the absorption variability, not only from patient to patient, but from patient given over time, is it hay fever season and they're
right. There's also so many variables, right?
They got a lot of snot and snot locker. What else is going on?
And then sometimes it works. I come by and the kid's nice and sleepy and I can sew up his face or whatever. So it just was like, and in the ER, man, I'm so damn busy. I need it to work. It has to be that, what is it? The Black Panther, it has to be, it's not 60% every time. I have to have 100% every time.
Oh, Sex Panther. Yeah.
Sex Panther. Yeah. Thanks.
60% of the time it works every time. No, you're absolutely right. That's my argument. Right? I don't want to get off on a tangent, but there's a lot of procedures. So I had the discussion about paracentesis with somebody the other day.
I just did one.
And I'm like, it's between setting up and getting the equipment and blah, blah, like that's a lot of time. I could have been seeing 3 other patients.
Yeah. You can see 3 quick patients.
Let's get real. They weren't in respiratory distress. That wasn't an emergent situation.
Yeah.
They can get the internist can do it. They don't get enough procedures as it is. Let them do it. Right.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too in the weeds on, on ER flow issues, but that's not what we're talking about. But
well, we have
I'm really, whenever I see nasal stuff or trochees, and I'm not saying that trochees don't work, but it's like, what? It's like, I think they're coming up with a lot of stuff and you see that the amounts that they have to give, the concentrations that they have to give in order to approach what you would give if it were injectable, they're just so much higher.
And
And
the
then you
cost,
have to,
the
and you have to
cost
have a
is really high.
carrier. You have to
Yeah.
have something to keep it stable. If they're
Yeah.
trochees, you got to keep them in the refrigerator all the time,
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's just,
I'm
challenging.
surprised, and I don't mean to like demean anybody that's watching this that has this issue, but I'm shocked at the number of guys who are terrified of a little tiny insulin needle.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
like,
I'm going to share an anecdote with you. I changed. So one of my patients was already on TRT when he came to me,
mhm.
and I just had a telemedicine appointment with him last week, and he made a note of like 5 different things that he was really liking about my practice, and one of them was the 25 gauge needles.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't believe the difference between a 21, 22 and a 25.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, I get that. I get that.
He was doing punch biopsies of his thigh,
Right.
So, and now he's like, yeah, he's like, oh, it doesn't hurt. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to hurt.
Yeah. It's, he uses a separate draw needle from an injection needle, but he really appreciates it. Me, I don't care. I'm used to doing it. I draw with a 22 and I inject with a 22. I know there's a little bit of discomfort with it when I'm fine with it. But yeah, I can definitely see how somebody who maybe has a little bit of a needle aversion to begin with, and then you're making them do, punch biopsies of their iliotibial.
But the nice thing, the peptides they're all aqueous, they're all in saline. So you can literally use the little 31 gauge like tuberculin syringes if your patient, you can draw it up.
Yeah, because they're not as oily as say testosterone.
They're water, they're saline.
Yeah.
So so that's a little bit better. But sometimes, and that's where the nasal thing comes in. I think they're kind of marketing to that crowd. Women are a little bit less likely to be willing to inject themselves, although that's clearly not universal. But if they're more expensive, the delivery system's not great. It's just a way to just maybe generate a little revenue. I don't know. I'm not a fan. I don't think, there's now the nasal testosterone, the testo. You have to do it multiple times per day. I don't see that doing well on the market. I'm kind of surprised that they brought it to market. It's a big pharma product, but stick with
and then what do you do if you do it and a minute later you sneeze? Do you redose yourself?
I guess you redose, and then your levels are going to be a little unpredictable. They're going to be unpredictable regardless, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's always a person out there that's like, that's how I'm going to do it. There are guys that love their pellets for some reason, and we both know that there's pellets are probably not the best way to deliver any hormone.
I'm not a fan.
Everywhere. Yeah, they pop up everywhere. So, but anyway, getting back to recovery, I guess, coming back full circle, having a healthy endocrine system clearly is important. Whatever that might be for you, it is going to be really, really, really important.
What are your thoughts on, so I've talked to a couple different people that have done the, I'm blanking on the word now. Basically they go into a dive chamber and they get hypersaturated
hyperbaric oxygen.
Yeah, hyperbaric oxygen. What are your thoughts? I mean, that's something obviously we're not all Michael Jackson. We don't have one in our home, right?
No. The caveat being, I for longevity and like biohacking and stuff, I don't know the literature on that.
Yeah.
There may be some. I just haven't looked into it.
They say they've shown telomere lengthening when you do it, but then the problem is, as soon as you stop doing it, you go back again.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for my listeners that don't know, those of you who haven't read my book, shame on you. Your telomeres are like, imagine those little plastic things at the end of your shoelaces, and that when you're young, they're really, really long, and then they get worn out over time. So that's like if you went to the carnival, you got a roll of tickets, and you're giving out tickets the whole time. When your tickets are gone, your carnival rides are over.
You're dead.
So yeah, so when your telomeres are done, you're done.
It literally is your biological clock. So yeah, every time your cells divide, you lose a certain number of base pairs off those.
Yeah. So all the bad shit,
that might be the case with the hyperbaric oxygen. But from what literature I've seen on telomeres, there's nothing better than to protect your telomeres and to add to your telomeres than losing like 20 pounds of visceral body fat.
Right.
Get the fat off. And
that's
it's adipotoxicity, they call it. It's a real thing. It shortens your telomeres big time. So, but the hyperbaric oxygen, my main experience with that is in the military with dive chambers, and then in wound care for diabetics. We send them to the chamber.
Yeah, and we know that it does. It speeds up wound healing, right? It's but it's, again, unless you're Michael Jackson and you can afford to have one in your house,
right.
I don't know. Yeah. What are your thoughts on, some very, we'll do, and I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but just briefly, things like prolotherapy, it's, and I guess, but previously I had only heard about, these targeted PRP, targeted prolotherapy going in. Oh, I got a bad knee. I got a bad elbow. I got a facet issue in my neck. Now I'm hearing that they're actually doing IV prolotherapy that it's just like, hey, go forth and do great things. I don't know if there's any data on that.
I hadn't seen anything recently on it. I remember looking at prolotherapy a while ago on, there's two really good, quack busting sites. One is Quackwatch. I think it's either quackwatch.org or quackwatch.com. And then the other is like sciencebasedmedicine.com, I think is the other one. And they blow that kind of stuff out of the water. So now the PRP, that's a different story, for injury repair. I've asked a couple local orthopedists about it, and they kind of downplayed it, but they were older guys. I don't know how much they are up on the literature on it. I know we got a couple guys in my jiu-jitsu gym that have had like subacromial PRP injections and have sworn by them. On paper it makes sense. I would certainly not be opposed to trying it. At this stage, like I'm headed towards your road. Like I'll have my plastic knee and you'll have your plastic hip, and we'll do jiu-jitsu one day. But I'm trying to make this thing last as long as possible. So yeah, if something comes along, like, exosomes are another thing that's got some emerging data on it, stem cells, and then, PRP, I would try all of it if I thought there was even a reasonable amount of data.
Maybe that's what I was hearing about. Maybe it was IV stem cells that I was hearing about. It was something, it was one of those bro science things. I think it was on the Rogan episode where he interviewed Hulk Hogan, which is a great episode, by the way.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out.
But I was listening to it while I was driving and I was multitasking. So maybe it was stem cells specifically IV.
The problem with a lot of this new stuff, like, I think it has a lot of potential. Like, we just need to figure it out. But the problem is there's always there's like the quacks just like jump on this stuff, and they see dollar signs, and so they grab it, they cherry pick the studies, and then they just inflate it like it's God's gift to whatever. And I'm always like, whoa, like, okay, maybe there's something here, but like, you don't have the evidence to back up these claims that you're making that that this is gonna regenerate all your joints and all this stuff. But that doesn't stop them from charging like $5,000 for stem cells. And
and that's right now there's a place here in Austin that does whatever it is that is FDA approved, they're doing, right? The stuff that's a little that's kind of under the table type stuff. They're doing it in Panama. They're doing it in Colombia. And I know
Mexico. There's all kinds of clinics.
And Mexico too. But I guess honestly, I think the place in Panama and the place in Colombia are doing the exact same thing as as what's going on in Mexico.
Yeah.
But I think the only difference is they recognize that there is a stigma attached to going to Mexico for medical treatments.
Oh, right? Maybe,
Because everything from injecting, using a caulking gun to inject people's buttocks,
So
you
yeah,
know,
the
and
silicone butt injections.
yeah, all this other crazy stuff. So
Yeah.
they're like, oh yeah, well, oh no, I would never go there, but I'll go to Colombia and I'll go to Mexico. And
Right.
I have a friend who went to Colombia, and it sounded, you know, from what he was telling me, it sounded pretty legit. He felt better,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they were doing hyperbaric treatments
Yeah.
at the same time. You
Absolutely.
know, that he
These
was
guys
doing
could
the
be
other
right.
stuff.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll fully concede like this. They could totally be onto something, and they're just like at the very tip of the spear.
yeah,
And then I mean, you and I both know, like in the TRT world, I mean, it takes years for the established medical community to catch on to something.
yeah,
Like, oh, maybe this is actually something good. And meanwhile, like
yeah,
people have been doing it for 10 or 15 years. So yeah, I fully concede like they could be onto something really, really
yeah.
major. It's
What
just
you
we
have
need we
you have
need
the
the data.
establishment medical
Right.
community over here, right? That everybody accuses of being bought out big pharma, and it's not an
Yeah.
incredibly outlandish
Yeah.
accusation, right?
Yeah.
And then you have the quacks over here, and somewhere in between is the truth,
Probably,
right?
yeah. That's
But
probably about right.
we're just
Yeah.
not 100% sure on the scale where that is.
Right.
And
And
we're, you
that
know,
takes time, right, to figure that
yeah,
out.
the old guard guides tend to, you know, they're they're dismissive of all this stuff. They won't
Mhm.
even entertain it, right?
No, they're
And then
stuck
the
in their ways. It's
quacks,
not going to happen.
one of the quack red flag terms, and I first heard this during COVID from Pierre Corey, who's an absolute fucking quack. But I've heard it from multiple, you know, the types of guys that you're talking about, the people that are doing these new therapies.
Yeah.
That if you ask them, so for those of you that don't know, so whenever you do a study, you do what's called a controlled study. So I would have one group of people that I give a treatment to, and then I would have another group of people that are about the same age, about the same physicality, similar in every possible way, same number of people. And I would either give them a placebo or nothing at all, right? So maybe
Yeah.
I'm injecting testosterone in 50
Yeah.
guys over here, and I'm just injecting normal saline in
And
guys
you
over
wouldn't know
here.
either which one they get.
Right. And it's what they call a blinded study. So they don't know what they're getting.
Mhm.
And then you evaluate, you know, measurable stuff. Are they stronger? Is their cardio, you know, is their VO2 max improved?
Yeah.
And, you know, and subjectively, do they feel better? Right.
Yeah.
That's how you do a proper study. And
Yeah.
the problem with a lot of these quacks that you're talking about, Drew, is you ask them, you say, well, you know, what are the controlled studies? And I've heard this multiple times, and I laugh my ass off every time. And this is what they say: I don't believe in control groups because that means that you're just watching half of the people suffer for no reason. And it's like, that's complete bullshit. You're not a scientist. You have no fucking business calling yourself a scientist.
Right.
You need to stop that shit right now. Because the truth of the matter is, and Drew, you and I know this, that you do what's called an intention to treat scenario, which is mean if I'm 2 weeks into the study and all of my testosterone guys are fucking rocking the roof and all of my guys are feeling like shit, I go, hey, you know what? This works. Hey guys, come in here. You're getting the good stuff too.
Or your testosterone guys are dying, you know.
Right. Yeah. Or they all had pulmonary embolism and died.
They all died. Yeah.
Right? Then I stop what I'm doing. Right. It's called
the other thing too, you know, and the quacks too. Well, if you really press them on a study and you get them to cough one up, it's like in rodents, you know. It's or you know, or it was in some group that really is like it'd be a very niche, like very specific small study in a certain patient group that is nothing like the people like they're treating everybody when really like this study only showed evidence in this particular group, which again doesn't mean it doesn't work in those other people. It's just that's your evidence, you know. So you know, and I think it's okay.
I also tell people,
if
you look at a study and you can't pronounce any of the last names of the people that did the study, look for more studies. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that to be xenophobic, but it is true.
It sounds a little xenophobic to me.
It does.
But I know you, so I know better.
You know, I'm not xenophobic.
But yeah, exactly. But the point is, you know, like, you know, as a doc, like, you know, you and I think would probably be on the same page. And, you know, I'm okay like discussing treatments with patients that I know don't have, you know, world-class double-blind placebo-controlled studies behind them. But we talk about it.
Yeah, you couch that with the patient.
Yeah,
you say, look, this is the basis.
Shared decision making, right?
Yeah,
So, and especially like if I've seen it work in the past in somebody in a similar situation, but I don't have a double blind paper, randomized study to show them, doesn't mean I'm not going to consider it, but I am going to tell the patient, about that. And I don't make, I try, even with TRT, I don't make promises about TRT that, I've seen guys in the low 200s that did not feel better, after their levels were normalized, and I thought for sure they would. So now I just shut up, now most of the time that's rare. Most of the time they feel a lot better, of course, but there are guys that they're non-responders. So you just can't predict, so you just have to be like, you have to be very transparent with people and, not sell them bullshit and not set them up, give them false hope or false expectations, for stuff and take their money, which that's how quacks make a living.
Now, you know what? Honestly, Drew, 75% of the people that reach out to me that fill out a patient questionnaire and say they want to be impaneled as one of my patients, 75% of them, I end up turning away. I look at their labs. I'm like, you don't need me. Your numbers are not, they could be a little bit higher. Right. But, your issue is you need to sleep more. Your issue is I had one guy that I had to tell him his whole issue was he's like, I feel okay in the gym, blah, blah, blah. I don't feel like I'm recovering properly. And then he told me the 4 different ways that he was monitoring his sleep every night. He was wearing the ring. He was wearing like a watch. He was doing and I was like, dude, you're just too OCD, man.
Yeah.
Like I said, you don't need testosterone. You need some edibles, man. You just need to fucking chill.
Come to Oregon. We got lots.
So you just need to chill, man. I'm like, you're way too caught up on this.
But see, that's because you're a good doctor. That's because you're a good doctor. The two clinics here in town that are not run by physicians, they would have given that guy testosterone in a heartbeat.
Oh, I've had multiple guys come to me who I know would have gotten put on the sauce. One guy came to me and it's like, I read all of his stuff. His numbers were great. His actually, his aging male symptom score was not terrible. And then come to find out it's because he's got 6 kids that all do jujitsu, soccer, ballet, like all this other shit. And it's like, from the moment he gets up, he's running around. I'm like, dude, you're busy. I'm like, you don't need testosterone. You need a 27-hour day, and I can't give that.
Right. Or a day off.
Or a day off. Yeah, basically. I said, you need your kids to get a little bit older, start driving to take care of the younger ones. Is what you need.
Yeah, and that's it's a good point. Not to go. This would be a whole nother podcast, but like, so many of these guys with borderline testosterone levels that have, and also have sort of nebulous symptoms. They don't need testosterone.
No,
there are these other lifestyle things. There's, there's stuff in their relationships. There's stuff with their work, and they have 7 kids or whatever. It's like, it's but again, that's where these windmill clinics are making a killing.
Yeah.
You and I could probably quadruple our income overnight with testosterone.
Yeah. If I divorce myself from medical ethics,
right,
I could clear $500,000 next year.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean,
but I'm just not prepared to do that.
We could open up our own, quack clinic, and we could wear our black scrubs together.
Yeah, because black scrubs are the way to go. They are the coolest.
We didn't plan that, by the way.
No.
Well, anyway, you know what I mean? Like
I own one pair of green scrubs because one of the hospitals I worked at required them. Everything else is black. So.
There you go. Yeah, me too. So, but yeah, right, it's unfortunate, but that's you run a private practice, you have to keep the lights on, but at the same time, like you have to be an ethical physician. You have to put the patient first.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's all I got to say.
100%. I think that's a great spot to leave it. Tell everybody, of course, I'm going to have all your contact stuff in the show notes, but tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find your practice, where they can find you on social media and your YouTube channel.
Yeah, my new YouTube channel is just called Man Medicine. It's very simple. And my practice, you can find me at manmedicine.com. So, yeah, if you're in the state of Oregon, Texas, Utah, and Florida is where I currently have active medical licenses. I have patients in all those states. I do consults, advice-only consults, though, for people all over the world. I think I've hit almost every continent so far, not Antarctica. But yeah, I think I've hit all the other continents.
Yet.
With consults, I really enjoy helping guys get their lives back on track with their health and get optimized. It's a good time.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you coming on,
Yeah,
brother.
thanks.
It's been a slice
Anytime.
as always.
Yep.
I'm going to close out today with a quote from the great philosopher Toby Keith, who said, "I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was." Remember that, everybody. And until next time, live life like a warrior.
All Man Medicine video and audio has been created and shared online for informational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute the practice of medicine or professional healthcare services of any kind, including the giving of medical advice. I am not your doctor. No doctor-patient relationship has been established. This content is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied upon solely for that purpose either. The only purpose of this content is to present peer-reviewed, research-backed health information for your consideration. As always, rely on the advice and guidance of your personal physician before undertaking any activity presented here, and if in doubt or not comfortable with said activity, practice discretion. Your health is your responsibility and not ours. Finally, I take conflicts of interest seriously. I accept no compensation whatsoever from any private corporations, including pharmaceutical or supplement companies. You can trust that if I recommend a medication, product, or service, it's because I genuinely believe in it and not because I'm being paid to endorse it.